Okay. Yes, I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that on the whole, we don't emphasize the breath in this practice, in uncontrived mindfulness, receptive mindfulness practice, mindfulness as a wisdom practice. It's just one object amongst many. And I just wanted to explain the reasoning behind that, and also when it can be appropriate to use the breath. But I think one of the main reasons is that a number of people can find the breath quite tricky, struggle with the structure of the mindfulness of breathing, the stages and the counting in particular, and get tense. Yes, so not find it sort of relaxing practice. So that's one reason, which may or may not apply to you. But the second reason, more significant in a way, is that if we pay a lot of attention to the breath, it can blur the lines between, well, with what we're trying to do in the open practice, where we don't encourage any particular aspect of experience to focus on. It puts an undue focus on one aspect of experience. And even if you're trying to be open, if your main practice beforehand, a mindfulness practice is the mindfulness of breathing, then the tendency is to go towards the breath and prioritize that. Um, so it's good to get a sense of the practice, the open practice, because it's a wisdom practice rather than a samatha practice when we're aiming for calm. Its nature is, on the whole, to be more open. And part of that openness is that we're training to recognize what's occurring in a more impersonal way. We're not deliberately deciding where to pay attention or what to pay attention to, but to notice whatever is arising, letting awareness choose. That's one way of talking about it. But if you are familiar enough with open practice, and in Triratna now there are quite a few to choose from. If you go on retreat or even at your center, I think there's still not very much just sitting practice around, but there's a variety of practices that are in that sort of ballpark. So the whole secular mindfulness range, which have come into, I think they've influenced practice in centers in quite a big way. Um, Tejananda's simply being Vasantra's way of bringing Mahamudra in, pure awareness. So there's quite a few practices where the breath is not the main object, even though it may be one of them. So perhaps it's less of an issue now. So receptive practice, receptive mindfulness changes the way that we relate to experience. And this can have a very positive effect on how we do other practices. So you may find that the open practice starts to influence how you, if you're at the center and there's a mindfulness of breathing, how you do that. I think it particularly changes the way that we pay attention and the kind of effort that we use, um, not narrowing down and to one object and trying to stay with it. So the mind can feel a little bit more relaxed, a bit more natural. Um, but the really big thing I think is that our minds get used to checking the relationship to experience, checking, what's happening in the background if there's a particular object in the foreground. So we might catch if the tension arises from perhaps over focusing on the breath, then we catch that more quickly. And if frustration arises because we find it's tricky to stay with the breath, then we also see that, and that noticing, that seeing of what what's happening has an effect on the mind that has its own sort of relaxing and opening effect. Uh, yeah, so when we don't have an agenda to stay with one single object, and when any object is a good one for meditation, when that message has come through sort of quite strongly, it affects how we pay attention and it takes the pressure off. Um, so having said all that, there are, of course, benefits to using the breath if it feels like a helpful object. It's a good object because it's so central to our experience. It's always right there, and it does help grow stability of mind. That sort of steadiness that yeah, we can talk about as concentration, but actually I prefer just to talk about the mind becoming more steady, more stable. Um, that stability can bring pleasure and happiness to the mind, which is very helpful. It's very motivating to practice. It's it sets up a kind of reward. It's rewarding to feel the pleasure from our practice. And that pleasure that can come in open practice as well in a slightly different way. So personally, I found the more Vipassana practice, clear seeing, wisdom practice I do, it has become easier to stay with the breath in a helpful way. And if I start to tense up or if I find myself trying in an unhelpful way, I simply check the attitude in the mind. And that, as I said before, has become quite a natural thing to do, to temporarily let go of the agenda to stay with the breath, which I think before I was a lot less willing to do. It sort of stayed with the breath, come what may. But actually being willing to sort of let it go and check, oh, what's happening? What's actually happening in the mind here? Keeping that very loose connection with the breath, but opening out to more of experience. Um, yeah, I've learned to hold the breath in a broader container. And then when I can feel the mind relaxing again, then going back to the practice. So we're using awareness and right view in a slightly different setting, if you like, to check the quality of the mind. We're doing the same thing with it, which is checking the quality of the mind, but while we can do it while doing um, mindfulness practice or metta practice as well. So if it feels helpful, do explore and experiment with using the breath at times as a primary object. See what effect it has on the mind. And then after a period, broaden out again to just completely open agendaless practice and see if what effect each kind of mode on the mind has. If you already know that, oh no, no, actually no, I can't go too close to the breath without it, um, having a detrimental effect on the mind, recognize that whatever it is, whether it's a aversion or a sort of anxious feeling or oh, you can recognize that and maybe just say, okay, don't need to do that. Um, Basically, we're using whatever works in the service of cultivating wisdom, cultivating awareness and wisdom. So we can use the breath and more stability in that way, or we can just continue to use open practice, growing awareness, and in the service of growing right view and wisdom. Okay, I'll leave it there. Let's do some sitting.